This is a pretty insane time we're in again, isn't it? It just echoes of the Gulf War again.
Well, it's an insane world, mate. I mean, anyone that can still think at the tail end of 2015 that this world is in any way normal and sane, I really don't know what to tell you, because the signs are all around that we're living in a bloody global lunatic asylum. And it became clear to me quite a few years ago. I mean, you and me go back, 15 plus years, I suppose.
Easily,
and you know me as a DJ, as a radio and club DJ, which I've been for 25 years or so. But 5 years ago, I really woke up to some great truths about what is happening in this world and who's running it and what it's really all about. And you come to realize that the world is not run by the individuals and the organizations we're told it is. It's actually run by a network of secret societies who are steeped in dark occult ritual practices. And there's very few of them compared to the rest of the global population. We're talking thousands or tens of thousands at the very most, controlling the rest of the population of billions. I mean, the ratio is absolutely ridiculous when you look at it, and you wonder how the hell they've been able to do it. But when you start researching this subject area, you find it's an absolute minefield, and you realize that this has been going on for thousands of years. And you realize that these individuals have had human society locked down in every conceivable, imaginable way throughout all that time. And all we're seeing through things that are in the news headlines is a representation of that fact. And so what is happening in Syria and what happened 3 weeks ago with the Paris attacks is just a representation and an aspect of this insanity. Nothing is as it seems. You come to realize that we are all in a massive mind-controlled state. Most people have no idea that this is happening. Most people have no idea of the methods of manipulation that are being used against them. But that is the case. And unfortunately, all the stuff that you hear on mainstream so-called news outlets, corporate-owned mainstream TV networks, radio stations, so-called newspapers, and the BBC is all propaganda, and 90+% of it will be lies. And the same thing coming out of the mouths of government ministers. I mean, is anyone really surprised at that? These are professional paid liars, and they're in office to represent the interests of those that control them and those that pull their strings.
David Cameron, then, he's standing there and he's debating about, we need to go into Syria, we need to drop bombs on IS because they hate us, they want us to die in the worst possible way, and they're not actually Orthodox Muslims, they're just using the Muslim brand to create chaos and fear within the Middle East. You're saying it's not David Cameron that's actually putting that message into Parliament. This is a secret society that is telling David Cameron what to say.
Absolutely. David Cameron is a puppet, and he's doing what he's told to do by his owners. It was the same thing with Blair. It was the same thing with Gordon Brown. It's the same thing with all of them. Same thing with Obama. You know, these world leaders don't get there through being the best man for the job. They don't get there through hard work and keeping their head down and focusing. They get there because they're selected. And, you know, you hear the phrase that presidents and prime ministers aren't elected, they're selected. They're the favourites for the job by those who own them and are really running the show. And they're just, shuffled into place to do the job. If it wasn't Cameron, it'd be someone else. It just happens to be him that has been chosen for that role at this time.
If David Cameron wants us to send bombers over Syria, what's the result?
Well, they thrive on terror and mayhem and war and suffering and death, unfortunately. It's been that way for a very long time. Most of the wars that have happened in recent human history have been manipulated. They've not happened organically the way we're told, the way it appears in the history books. What you've got is within this network of controllers working through these secret societies, they're mainly banksters, very rich financiers. They are mainly Zionists. They're following a Zionist agenda. Zionism is a political movement, a political creed rather than a race. It is connected to Israel, of course, but it's not necessarily Jewish people as such. It's Zionists. And as I say, most of them are bankers and they're globalists, and they have an interest in this scheme known as the New World Order, which has been on their wish list for a very long time.
I mean, we see that in the movies and on TV shows, and The Blacklist, which is a hugely popular show, which I really enjoy watching, starring James Spader. I mean, that is essentially, that's the storyline at the moment. They're trying to create a new world order. This globalization that they're trying to create is in their interest of just keeping a few people rich.
Well, that's one aspect of it. There's usually several aspects as to why these sick, psychotic individuals do anything that they do. They've been hell-bent for a very long time in completely subjugating and enslaving the rest of humanity and basically just having us in service to them. And you see a metaphor for this in the movie The Hunger Games, where you've got this kind of elite class presiding over the rest of the population. And, 99% of the population are in slavery to these elites and, doing their bidding and absolutely at their whim and their will. And this is what they do with Hollywood movies. They actually present the truth in so many cases about what's going on in the world. They encode it into these movies and they tell the truth to the subconscious mind of the general public. And it's a very neat trick because anyone claiming that this is the sort of stuff that's really going on in the world can be dismissed and written off as a fantasist. And you can say, oh, you've been watching too many movies, mate. You need to get real, get out more, get a life. So it's a brilliant way of discrediting researchers who are onto what's actually going on. But they're always putting the truth into Hollywood movies. And one thing they've wanted to do for a very long time is have a one world government with a one world currency and a one world army. They want to do away with individual nation states, and they want to have this one new world order arrangement. And when you actually look at some of the stepping stones that have been in place towards that in recent headlines, you can see how it's actually starting to take shape. They're stripping away currencies. They want to eventually have a one world currency. And the euro was just one step towards that, the way they wiped out all those individual European currencies and just had the euro. And there's plans to do it in America, Canada, and Mexico with the Amero, which is this single unit of currency they're trying to introduce there. So that's one aspect of it. And then you've got NATO, which is a bringing together of the military forces of various countries in the West. They want that to be a kind of one world military operation, and they're trying to do it in all other areas of society as well. And they're trying to do away with cash, which is another step towards this one world currency. They've already started to do that in Sweden. Use of cash is being stripped away by the day there, and everything's being done electronically. And this is another aspect to what they're trying to do. They want everyone linked up electronically to a giant global computer. Eventually, they want to introduce microchipping and implants, electronic RFID chip implants into humans so that we're linked via Wi-Fi signals and radio signals to computers. And this is the way our daily lives will be operated. And I know it sounds wild. I know it sounds fantastic. I know it sounds outrageous to anyone hearing this for the first time. But when you actually pay attention to what's going on in the world, the evidence is all around you. And the first step towards really understanding all of this has to be switch off the goddamn TV, because there's nothing but lies, propaganda, brainwashing and mind control coming through that bloody thing.
The first question somebody would ask is, well, how do you know all this? Where's this come from?
I'm not some single guy with these wild, wacky theories sitting here spouting my views on things. There are hundreds of thousands of people on the path to discovering truth now. And there's whole communities of individuals that research this stuff, that communicate with each other and share their findings. There's so many websites out there. There's so many filmmakers putting YouTube videos up about all this stuff. There's so many documentaries. There's conferences and public events now happening where people come and talk about what they found with this stuff. There are whistleblowers and insiders that have worked for government departments and the military and various other organizations that are bravely coming forward and sharing information with people. So all this can be known. For anyone that wants to research it, you don't need any special qualifications. You don't need to have gone to university. You don't need letters after your name. You just need to be capable of critical thought. You need to have a mind that you can call your own, and just combine that with two eyes that you see with and a brain that you think with. And, it's possible to put all these pieces together and understand this stuff.
So what started you on this journey then, if you like? I mean, what was the one thing that triggered you to think, and this is BS, well, I've got to look into this?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. It was a combination of things, really. I've always been someone that has thought outside of the box, if you like. I've always considered alternative viewpoints on things. My dad was a lot like that, well, still is. And he kind of put me on the path to doing lots of reading and doing lots of research. So even before I woke up properly, which was in 2010, I was already somebody that was prepared to consider alternative viewpoints on things. I knew from a very young age that there was something very wrong with there being a royal family. But I knew, from a very young age that they were wrong uns and that this was morally unjustified, that there could be one family kept in all this wealth while everybody else is in subjugation to them. I could never understand why that was tolerated. And also I became a vegetarian 27 years ago because it's just something I decided to do. I didn't know anybody else that was, but I thought, well, it's a choice that works for me, so this is a route I'm going to go down. So I've always been somebody that's prepared to, consider these things, and I've not been afraid to stand on my own if necessary. And it was 5 years ago, just at the tail end of doing a lot of reading and a lot of research, and it was the books of David Icke. And I know that a lot of people whose only perception of David Icke is remembering that famous Wogan appearance back in 1991 where he was ridiculed and, taken the piss out of. And a lot of people still hold that memory of him. But if you've never actually read any of his books, and if you've never listened to anything that he's got to say, then you're just coming at it from a very skewed and limited viewpoint. And it was reading his books and just considering what he had to say with an open mind and applying it to the world that I saw around me that just made sense of so many things. I found it answered more questions than it raised. And up to that point, I had a whole load of questions about life. Why are things this way? Why is there so much injustice in the world? Why is there always wars when nobody you speak to actually wants a war? So why do they keep happening? Why is there always economic and financial chaos? Why is there such a huge divide between the rich and the poor? And when you start to get into all this information, it gives you all the answers, and you can understand how it all fits together. And what was once a puzzling and baffling and chaotic world suddenly makes a whole load of sense. So, like I say, it's a route that anybody is free to go down as long as they've got a mind that is open enough to consider all these things.
You use the word awaken. I find that word very interesting because it suggests to me that it's almost like a Matrix kind of thing where, you're Neo, you're coming out of the pool of liquid and you're suddenly aware of what the reality is, which I think is something that you yourself liken your experience to, I believe. Or am I wrong on that?
Yeah, in many ways. I mean, the Matrix has a lot of truth encoded into it. Obviously, on its surface, its glossy, CGI-laden surface, it's this kind of action thriller movie. That's the way most people think of it. But when you get down to the philosophical levels of it, there's a lot of truth in that movie, which is why it's loved by so many people in the sort of truth scene, conspiracy scene, because they are actually telling you the truth about our reality and our existence in many ways. And it's all about a raising of consciousness. And one thing that you come to discover, which I did, is that everything in existence is energy vibrating at different frequencies. So we are made up of the same energy as everything else in the universe is, everything else organic. And we have consciousness, which is self-awareness, awareness of the fact that we are expressions of this consciousness. And we've been manipulated and mind-controlled through a lifetime of programming and conditioning, through TV, through stuff that we're told in schools, through stuff that government ministers tell us, through additives in food and drink, through vaccines, pharmaceutical drugs, and all of that, to basically walk around and spend most of our lives in a mind-controlled state, perceiving the world in this 3D reality in a very limited sense. So we look around us and that which we see with our eyes, we think is everything there is to see. But when you are able to raise your consciousness and rise above those very limited levels, you come to some understandings that weren't available to you before, and you open yourself up to these great truths. There is truth in creation, in existence, in the universe. It's not relative to whether any one person believes it or not, or what any one person thinks is the truth. There is absolute, universal, eternal, unwavering truth that is able to be known by anyone that chooses to tap into it through their free will. And that's the process that I went through. That's the process that a whole load of people are going through in these times, because people are waking up to the fact that there's bullshit all around us, as we touched on earlier. The mainstream media is lying to us. The reason we are poised to drop bombs on Syria, in which many thousands of innocent women and children and men are due to get blown up and lose their limbs and lose their homes and lose their lives. The reason for all of that is based on a lie. And it's a lie that has been concocted by these sick, psychotic individuals that are supposedly in charge of us. The Paris event of the other week was absolutely staged and manipulated into place by various aspects of Western governments. It did not happen the way we were told it did. It was not this fanatical group of Islamic fundamentalists known as ISIS. In actual fact, when you get down to it and do the research, you realize that ISIS or ISIL or whatever the hell they're calling themselves this week are actually the creation of the intelligence services, intelligence so-called, of Western governments, mainly the UK, the US and Israel, working in combination with each other to create this largely fictional enemy. They did the same thing with Al-Qaeda, who have now been retired and replaced by ISIS. And they create these sort of boogeymen, these public enemies, these villain organizations, so that they've got someone or something to blame these terror attacks, which they themselves concoct on. And they then feel that they can sell the lie to the public that we have to go to war with a foreign nation of choice in order to protect ourselves against these dastardly terrorists.
We always seem to find out about 20 years down the line when we're actually trying to take it, like Assad, I'm sure the same thing's going to happen with him. But, you know, all these people like Rumsfeld was instrumental in putting Saddam Hussein in power in Iraq. You know,
exactly.
The Taliban was, I mean, there's even a bloody Rambo film about putting the Taliban in place to get rid of the Soviets. I mean, you know, all this stuff, history doesn't lie. The only thing that lies is our memory. That is conveniently clouded by current politicians that are trying to sort of cover over the work done by previous ones. So, I mean, how are we not catching that? How are we not realizing that Osama bin Laden was, put there by the CIA?
Well, exactly. The Taliban were a creation of the CIA. Osama bin Laden was an asset of the CIA. He was known as Tim Osman. That was his bloody code name within the CIA. And, it's the same thing with Al-Qaeda. It's the same thing with ISIS. And they're all created by the same parties. And people are shocked and devastated to learn that the UK government and, our allies are instrumental in that. And it's two things, really, Neil. One of them is that the mind control runs very deep. We've spent a lifetime being programmed and conditioned to think a certain way. And there are two absolutely grave misconceptions that people often have. One of them goes, the government would never do that. Well, actually, they would, and they do it every day. And the other one is, well, if they did, the mainstream media would tell us about it. Well, of course they wouldn't if the mainstream media outlets are ultimately owned, when you go to the very top of the tree, by the same forces that are controlling these governments and manipulating these world events into play.
So you're saying Rupert Murdoch is part of all this then? Is he a main player?
Yeah, he is. He's a key player. Rupert Murdoch is right up there as one of the elites. He's not one of the absolute top dogs because the ones that are really directing these actions don't have any kind of public profile. They keep themselves out of the limelight. But there are certain names that we can know about who are very key players in all of this. Rupert Murdoch would be one. You know, the Rothschild family are constantly named, as are the Rockefellers, the royal family, of course, so-called, the Windsors or Saxe-Coburg, Gothas and Battenbergs, if we're going to call them by their proper names. But yeah, I mean, that's one aspect of it. The fact that we've been lied to and programmed and you know, mind controlled in this way all our lives, and people just don't want to believe that this is the case. And then the other reason why people just resist this kind of information, despite how blatant it is, despite how obvious the clues are all around them, is because to admit that you have been duped and taken in by the lies is to have to admit to yourself that you've spent an entire human lifetime being made a mug of and being a chump. And the human ego has a problem with that. The human ego has a problem with admitting that it's been so easily fooled. That's why it's so difficult. And the older you get, you know, the more advanced in years you are, the more difficult it is to switch from that mindset which you've held all these years. You do find that a number of teenagers and, you know, young people in their 20s and 30s seem to be more accepting of the suggestion that things aren't as we've been told, than somebody in their 50s or 60s or older. And particularly when you get people like university professors and college dons and people with degrees and, you know, high-ranking directors of corporations and stuff, they would have a very real problem with admitting that the world is different to what we're told, because that would mean that everything that they've worked for in their life and everything they've achieved is based on a lie as well. And it's understandable that their egos would have a problem with admitting that. So this is the way that they get people, you know, through the mind control and through the human ego.
For me, what stood out was the Virginia shootings, and I bored everybody that would listen because I came across a video. Doubtless you've seen the video yourself, where they show and they prove that the two reporters that were supposedly shot live on the report were actors. And they essentially took you through step by step why this whole thing was staged, how the woman could not possibly have been shot because she's spotted the guy about 10 seconds before. There are no bullets that physically enter her body. She runs off absolutely fine, screaming. Normally, you could argue it, I suppose. Well, you know, that's just ridiculousness. That's typical David Icke craziness, etc., etc. But with that, it was irrefutable for me. There was no way that you could ever discredit that as an absolute load of bollocks. But the problem is, most of the stuff on YouTube is so badly produced. It's hard, isn't it, to convey that with any sort of credibility. I mean, it must be a pain in the arse for you, because every time you try and make a point, people will just laugh at the videos that end up on YouTube.
Well, some videos are very well made, and there are full-length documentaries that get put out there. You know, for every major world event, there's at least one very credible documentary that gets put out. There's usually books that end up getting written. There are podcasts, and there are researchers doing radio interviews where they coherently and eloquently put forward their points. Obviously, some of the stuff is sloppy and shabby, but that's just down to the fact that it's regular people doing homemade videos in their own home with very limited resources, because they just are keen to get the truth out there. Look, there's a couple of things that people might like to consider if their first instinct is to write off the suggestion that things like the Paris attacks were staged and were a hoax as ridiculous and impossible. First of all, if you were to say to most people, if there were a massive conspiracy in the world to enslave you and your children, and if there were plans in place for a global police state and for the rest of humanity to be locked down in enslavement to a few power elites, would you want to know about it? Now, who is going to say, no, you're all right, mate, I don't really want to know about that? I think, this is just my personal view, but I think probably 80-90% of people that you put that to would say, well, of course I'd want to know. Yeah, if there was something threatening me and my family, and if there was this nightmare scenario just round the corner that my kids are going to have to live through, then of course I'd want to know about it. So you say, okay, right. So we've established that you would want to know. Here I am telling you that it's going on. And when you do tell these very same people that say they would want to know, you tell them what's going on, And they still say, no, that's ridiculous. That can't possibly be true. No, I can't go for that.
Well, let's get to that then, Mark.
I guess you didn't really want to know that badly after all.
But anyone listening is like, oh, this guy's, he's already said he's a club DJ. Why should we take what you're saying seriously as opposed to David Cameron, who is, an esteemed leader of the free world that is standing there and telling us, you pay me to stand here and protect you. Why should we believe you, a club DJ? You know me. I'm not saying that patronizingly to you. I'm saying it to get you to prove yourself and establish your credibility to the audience.
Sure. I'm in a position where I have no kind of axe to grind and no belief system to defend. I'm not coming at this as a Tory or a Labour supporter or as a Christian or as a Muslim or as someone with a university degree to protect or as someone representing a particular organisation or a particular company. I'm just a guy. I'm just an individual guy. As you've said, I've been a club DJ. Absolutely. Which means I'm outside of these worlds that I look into. The world of politics, the world of finance and banking, and the world of all these false flag hoaxes that go on, and the world of Hollywood movies and what goes on there. Because I'm outside of that, I can look at it all objectively, and I can look at evidence and facts and just go where the truth takes me, instead of having any preconceived beliefs or ulterior motives in place. And that's actually a very good position to be in. Somebody that spent their entire life working in the mainstream media is going to have a very real problem accepting any alternative versions of what's going on in the world, because all they've ever known is the official version of everything, which has been peddled by their employers. They've been told what to report, they've been told what to think, they've been told what to say. And so it's going to be very difficult for them to step outside of that box. And it's the same thing for anyone that's been in politics all their lives. They've had the official version of what's going on in the world through the political system. And they've not been able to view it from a different perspective. So it's only when you can step outside of all of that, armed with that open mind and armed with the truth and prepared to go wherever it takes you, that you can see the wood for the trees and, join the dots and see how the big picture pans out. You
do get to go to various expos and conferences, don't you, and do speeches. So you wouldn't be doing that unless there was some credibility to what you're saying. And I'm guessing institutions and organisations obviously believe what you're saying as well, because they wouldn't invite you as a guest speaker.
Well, yeah, the specialist subject that I get into is the music industry and how it's controlled, the corporate music industry, and all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes and the reasons for it being under such levels of control. And I get into the very fine detail of how it's done. So I get booked to do public talks now and radio appearances and stuff to talk about that information. But it all feeds into the much bigger picture of what's going on in the world. And, you could have somebody talking about the banking industry. You could have somebody talking about what happened with 9/11 and all these other false flag events. You could have somebody talking about the dangers of vaccines and GM foods, then chemtrailing, geoengineering, what's going on with that, the transhumanist agenda. There's all these different specialist strands to what's going on. But ultimately, it all feeds in to the same bigger picture, which is, what the hell is going on in this world? Who's running the show? What are they doing to us? How have they been able to get away with it for so long? And most importantly and crucially, what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to stand by and let them put the final pieces in place to this nightmare scenario that they want to introduce? Or are we going to take some personal responsibility for what's happening and do something about it? And the first step towards that is recognizing that it's going on. Waking up out of your trance state and realizing what's happening in the world. Who can look at this world and think that it's sane, really? That it's normal? Who can look at what is about to happen in Syria and think, oh, well, it's just one of those things. It's just human nature, isn't it? It's just the way that it goes. Why are we constantly at war with nations in the Middle East? How come these terrorist events just happen to take place at key moments before, planned military action takes place? You don't have to go back very far to recall how Cameron and his pals wanted to bomb the shit out of Syria. What was it, a couple of years ago, or year and a half ago? And they couldn't get public consent for it. There was massive public disapproval for it. Most people in the UK did not want to go to war with Syria. And so they kind of went away and licked their wounds for a while. And then what happens? We just happen to have this conveniently timed terrorist attack in Paris. And one of the attackers just happens to drop a Syrian passport. One of these suicide bombers is said to have lost his passport, because you do that, don't you? You're going out on a suicide bombing mission. Yeah. Right, I've got me ammunition belt, got me detonator, got me timer. Oh shit, I forgot my passport. I must put me back. That's right, yeah, because I might want to take off on an EasyJet holiday afterwards. So, I mean, how stupid do they think we are? They plant a bloody Syrian passport on the scene as a way of saying to people, look, we told you, they're coming from Syria. We've got to go in and bomb them now. I mean, are people really buying this, that event would happen at that time, and that now we have to go in and bomb Syria because they're harboring ISIS terrorists? I mean, really, come on. People just need to start paying attention. Human lives are at stake here. Let's not mess about, I mean, the reality of the situation is thousands of people are going to die horribly and be injured and lose their homes, and all based on a lie, on pure lies. And it's because we've got psychopaths in place as our so-called leaders, and they've got to go. And people need to recognise this fact, because for as long as there's public consent, for as long as the general public at large just sit back and don't voice any objection to it and just allow this to go on, expect more of the same.
I mean, we can't really touch on everything in half an hour. We've touched the surface of this. Fascinating stuff, Mark. I want to get you back on at some point soon, because obviously we've only really done the current affairs side of things. I know that There's a whole load of stuff within Hollywood and showbiz and music and the entertainment industry, which we haven't had a chance to touch on, but we definitely will do soon. While we got you here, you got something you want to plug, haven't you? There's a book coming soon. Tell us a little bit about that quickly, if you can.
Yeah, well, I'm just finishing up the subbing and proofing of my book. It's going to be called Musical Truth. And anyone that remembers Musical Youth back in the day will see the wordplay there. And it combines the two elements that interest me the most in the world, which is music, still love music, and I love truth. And I'm bringing the two together in a book of about 170,000 words. It's been 13 months in the writing, and it's based on about 5 years worth of research. And it's like I was saying earlier, everything I've come to discover about how the corporate music industry is used for nefarious means against the general public, and also, crucially, tying into the big picture of what's really going on in this reality. And the last couple of chapters focus solely on that. So I'm publishing it early in the new year. I don't know exactly whether it's going to be January or February. I would say it will certainly be out by February. And yeah, I'd love to come back and talk about it in depth, mate. Because
definitely.
We've only scratched the surface today.
I know half of the stuff that you've even mentioned on this one, and I'm still gagging to find out more. And if anybody is interested in what you've said and they would like to hear a bit more now and they don't want to wait, is there anywhere out there that you've got some stuff on this out in the public domain, or podcasts or radio shows or whatever?
Yeah, I've got a podcast series called Good Vibrations, and you can get that on my SoundCloud page. The easiest way to get to it, to be honest, is to go to markdevlin.co.uk, because there's links there to all my work, and you'll be able to find a link to my SoundCloud page. And all the Good Vibrations podcasts are grouped together, and they're conversations with a whole load of researchers and authors on all manner of alternative subjects that will really fry your brain if you're new to it. And also, if people want to go to my YouTube channel, that's youtube.com/markdevlintv. I've got some of my public talks up there from various conferences where I go into great detail about some of the stuff that's going on. So people might find it of interest to watch a couple of those.
It's been great having you on, and I look forward to getting you back on again soon.